Order number 12, motion number 28 of 2023, establishment of a science museum.
Honorable John Kiarie.
Madam Speaker, I really thank you. And I want to move this motion that aware that Article 11.2b of the Constitution provides that the government shall recognize the role of science and indigenous technologies in the development of the nation, and further aware that the Vision 2030 provides for the integration of information, communication, and technology in the country's transformative agenda, and concerned that there exists no science museum for the consolidation, that there exists no science museum for consolidating indigenous scientific and technological innovations, training and research purposes in all of the East African region, and appreciating that the integration of science and technology would greatly enhance Kenya's economic and societal success, and noting that there is potential growth in the technology sector by establishing a science museum, and further noting that the informal science education plays a key role in progression of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, acknowledging that science museum operate as the nexus between science practitioners, policymakers, and the public, and cognizant of the fact that a science museum in the country would greatly impact on the economy of the country in the quest to become an industrialized nation. Now, therefore, this House resolves that the national government, through the relevant ministries, establishes and operationalizes a science museum in the country. Madam Speaker, I am standing on the floor of this House in the year 2024 and asking this House to agree with me that we should urge the government to establish a science museum in Kenya, and this will not be just the first science museum in East Africa. It will be the first and only science museum in all of Africa. Madam Speaker, a science museum becomes something important for a nation like us that has espoused in its guiding documents, starting with the Vision 2030, Madam Speaker, which says that we endeavor to be a knowledge-based economy. Madam Speaker, it is also this country that has developed the Kenya Digital Superhighway Project, an aspiration of Kenyans to be connected to technology of today. When we talk of technology of today, Madam Speaker, we are talking at a time when we are talking of the onset of the fourth industrial revolution, also being called the era that shall be driven by artificial intelligence. Madam Speaker, we are seeing technologies like blockchain technology, the Internet of Things. All these advancements in technology are telling us that we're in a new era. But even in this new era, Madam Speaker, we ought to speak as Kenyans and speak as Africans and ask ourselves, if this is the fourth industrial revolution, where was Kenya in the third industrial revolution? Where was Kenya in the second industrial revolution? Where was Kenya in the first industrial revolution? Where was Africa when the world was moving into steam energy and mechanizing their operations? Where was Africa when the world adopted electricity as a way and a mode of driving their technology? Where was Africa when we were moving into microchips in what was called the dot-com era or the third industrial revolution? And I dare say that Africa slept through all those previous three revolutions. The question begs, are we the generation of parliamentarians that will superintend over Africa sleeping through the fourth industrial revolution? Madam Speaker, today the world is advancing using what I would call the Western model of development. The Western model of development is informed mostly by the advancements that have been introduced to the world by the British Empire, when they were able to conquer the world to a point where it was said that the sun never sets on the British Empire. These British are the ones who have introduced this new model of advancement that we are in today, Madam Speaker. But if you approach the British, they would tell you that before they came into their advancements, they were referred to as barbarians. If you ask the British, who is that person who came and advanced you? They will tell you that all the knowledge we have, we got it from the Romans. You will approach the Romans and you shall ask the Romans, where did you get the knowledge that you pride yourself in? And the Romans will tell you, all the knowledge that we have, we got it from the Greek. But Madam Speaker, our education system will only teach us only that far. If you seek further than that, Madam Speaker, you shall find that the Greek got all the knowledge that they have from Africa, Madam Speaker. That those people that we celebrate, those people that we call the Pythagoras and the boys, Aristotle, Socrates, and all these very famous people who are said to be the fathers of the disciplines of knowledge that we practice today, the fathers of psychology, the fathers of philosophy, the fathers of chemistry, the fathers of all these advancements that we talk about in education today, if they were honest to you, they will tell you that they came to Africa and found very advanced universities. In North Africa, we know of the universities that were in Egypt. In West Africa, we know of the great advancements and civilizations and libraries that were in Mali. Where we are, Madam Speaker, around the Habesha region, also known as Abyssinia, but actually the Kush kingdoms, we had our own technological advancements, our own advanced technology that would shock the world, Madam Speaker. If you go south, you will find advanced, very extremely advanced.
What's your point of order? He's still moving his motion.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I want to inform my colleague, who is my good friend, about the Greek philosophers, the Aristotle, the Plato. Majority of them, they never went to Africa, but we acknowledge Pythagoras' theorem came from Egypt. So it is good for my brother, good friend of mine, to learn it. And most of these philosophers, they never visited Africa before Athens moved towards democracy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I'm sure you're so informed. You may proceed.
Madam Speaker, that is a point of argument, and I wish that the Honorable CNN would wait for me to move the motion so that he can bring up this argument. But if you are patient enough, I will take him to class and let him know that I am speaking from a point of fact, that all this advancement that we call the Greek foundational knowledge was actually stolen, pilfered, borrowed from Africa. Madam Speaker, there is a great city in North Africa called Alexandria. And Alexandria celebrates a man known as Alexander the Great. This man is known worldwide as a great general of war. The story we are never told is that when Alexander and his soldiers came into Africa, they went into our very advanced libraries and universities. But they were not kind enough, Madam Speaker. When they pilfered what was in our libraries, they burnt down our libraries to the ground, raised down all the knowledge, stole it, pilfered it, and took it to Europe and claimed it to be their own knowledge. And that is the knowledge that they have put in books. And today, we celebrate the Greeks as the foundational fathers of the knowledge that we have. But I would like to let the Honorable CNN know that this knowledge, as a matter of fact, dig deeper into your reading, and you shall find that this knowledge was actually stolen from Africa. Madam Speaker, this would help in explaining why we have such advanced technology in places like Cairo, where we and Egypt, where we have what you would call the pyramids, Madam Speaker. People see pyramids just as structural formations, but I would like to say that even today, with all the advanced Western knowledge that we have, the scientists are not able to explain how the traditional African was able to put up such technological marvels as the pyramids. Pyramids that are aligned astronomically and astrologically, scientifically perfect, aligned to pyramids that are in South America, pyramids that are in the East, all scientifically aligned to a scientific exactitude that cannot be achieved even by the knowledge and scientific advancements that we have today. But most importantly, Madam Speaker, I was talking about the fact that Africa has not always been a technological dwarf. At some point in its moments of greatness, Africa was a scientific and technological giant. The misconceptions that Africa is a scientific dwarf emanate from the fact that, one, all of African traditional knowledge, all of African traditional heritage has not been put to books. It has not been recorded in words and figures. And as such, people who are reading science today only understand what was captured in books, in numeracy, in literacy. But they may never understand some of the oral traditional African knowledge that used to be preserved and transitioned to other generations orally. That is why, Madam Speaker, the African today suffers an inferiority complex. Africans, like CNN, may never know that it was Africans that civilized Europe into hygiene, Madam Speaker. That between the years of 700 to around 1400, Madam Speaker, it is emperors who came from Africa, went into Europe, conquered Europe, civilized Europe from its barbaric ways, and taught them how to use toilets, Madam Speaker. Europeans who are busy defecating in the streets and so on, Madam Speaker. And allow me, Madam Speaker, to prosecute this issue because it is a historical fact that the Black Moors were the emperors who ruled Europe between the years of 700 something AD and 1400 AD. Madam Speaker, the point I want to make is that the absence of the recording of our history, for us not being able to record our history, for us not being able to exhibit our history, for us not being able to preserve our technological advancements, we suffer the risk of misunderstanding our history because we shall only be served that which maybe the oppressor would want for us to know. However, Madam Speaker, we ought to understand that if you do not tell your story the way you want your story to be told, your story shall be told by somebody else in the way they want to tell it. So, Madam Speaker,
So
my motion...
Out of order? Your hand is up. But I can see your hand is up, but I'm not able... I can hear you saying point of order, but I cannot see you anywhere on the screen. Do you have your card? The card is not working. Okay, it's working now. So what is out of order?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My concern is Honorable Kiarie is bringing out very valid points. However, for him to use statements like Africans, like CNN, will never understand, will never know, that puts all of us to be in a point of ignorance that we do not know, except for Honorable Kiarie. Can he use more dignified language towards Africans, where I'm one of them?
Madam Speaker, valid point.
I do not want to defend you. I know that you have a lot of respect for Africans, but I don't want to defend you, so...
Madam Speaker, you got it perfectly. In fact, I celebrate Africans. That's why I'm moving this motion. And in fact, I would not want to generalize anybody into a point of ignorance because I know how well informed Africans are, up to and including my good friend CNN. I was making a reference to the fact that if one does not tell their story the way they want to tell their story might be told by somebody else in a way that you do not want to tell the story. Madam Speaker, I am moving a motion where I would want this parliament to support me so that we can establish a science museum that will create a nexus between scientists, scientific practitioners, policy makers, students, and the publics, different publics, so that we are able to preserve our technological advancements in a museum that is a living museum. Madam Speaker, it might be a point of argument that we already have museums, Madam Speaker. But the kind of museum I'm talking about is not a museum of natural history. A museum of natural history, as they exist today, is a museum that I would refer to as a dead museum. And with all respect, Madam Speaker, dead in the fact that in these museums, we go to see exhibitions of taxidermies or stuffed animals that are already dead. We go to see things of the past. A science museum is normally a museum that exhibits, is a living museum. It is able to cover the history of technological advancements from the past, taking into cognizant what is happening in the present, and also trying to imagine a future as we would want to imagine it, Madam Speaker. In Kenya today, where we are at, if you took just one line of science, a line that I know the Honorable Elisha knows very well, a line of telecommunication, for example, only quarter of a century ago, Madam Speaker, the order of the day was the dial telephone. The order of the day was a call box. But the child born today, a Gen Z, a Gen Alpha, cannot tell you what a call box is. They cannot tell you what a CD-ROM is. They cannot tell you what a floppy drive is. This is knowledge that will be lost, Madam Speaker. This is knowledge that if we do not preserve, we might suffer the fate that our forefathers suffered when traditional historical artifacts were being expatriated from this continent and being exhibited in far-flung capitals. As we speak today, Madam Speaker, it is common knowledge that we've got tons and tons of traditional African artifacts that are on exhibit in capitals far away from this continent. Madam Speaker, in this fourth industrial revolution, Africa cannot suffer the same fate. We ought to proactively stand up and claim our pole position as an African technological giant that Kenya is, to spearhead the new era by establishing science museums that will showcase Africa's scientific greatness, traditional greatness, that will showcase Africa's traditional scientific prowess. Madam Speaker, it was during COVID that people were scampering to look for a remedy. But I dare say, in places like Nyanza, somehow COVID was not as prevalent or was not as bad as it was elsewhere. And Madam Speaker, when you whisper to members from Nyanza, they will tell you that when COVID broke out, they fell back to a traditional remedy that they had used for centuries to cure and remedy malaria. A very bitter herb that is normally taken and boiled and taken as such. And it mitigates against the effects of fever, against the effects of a flu, and it was also working against the effects of COVID. Madam Speaker, this traditional knowledge is what is normally picked up by multinationals. They extract the active ingredients, but because they would not want to have something that they cannot preserve, they additionally add preservatives and conservatives. But even more dangerously, they put up a brand. And when the brand comes on, it gives it a premium position and it becomes an expensive product. But where is the African with the Wairimo plant that is planted in the mountain region that is able to cure a cold or a flu? This Wairimo plant is an active ingredient that is forming part of very many modern medicines, Madam Speaker. But this knowledge, if not preserved, if not exhibited, will go into waste, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the other point I would like to make is that we are coming into a new world. What I called the fourth industrial revolution, mainly driven by artificial intelligence. And you know, artificial intelligence, being the driver of Industry 4.0, relies on data. Data shall fuel the next world. Africa traditionally has not written down its data. Africa's data is not in numerals, it is not in numbers. So today, artificial intelligence is scraping data out of the internet, data that Africa is not present, so that we realize that Africa has not Africanized the internet as much as the internet has internetized Africa. And so, going into the fourth industrial revolution, our data might be missing in the formation of the driving force and the fuel that will drive the fourth industrial revolution. But most importantly, Madam Speaker, data representation. All data centers, main data centers that we are seeing are in the northern hemisphere. We want to see Africa contributing its data so that we are able to drive this fourth industrial revolution. Madam Speaker, with those few points, I would like to call upon members to support me in this motion that seeks to provide a science museum. Madam Speaker, to bring about a science museum that shall consolidate indigenous scientific and technological innovations, shall be a center of training and research purposes, and also shall be the nexus between the scientists, the science practitioners, the policymakers, and the general publics. Madam Speaker, I thank you, and I ask members to support me on this motion. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.